of the third world, they live very much like they did at the time of Jesus. It comes out of places in the Middle East where they still live very much. All the Bedouins still live the way they did at the time of Jesus and that sort of thing. And so there's going to be a lot that is brand new and that undermines a lot of tradition. We sometimes don't realize, because we hear the Gospels in pieces, like on Sunday, and then leave out whole pieces, that we really have added in so much to what we believe, and it contradicts the Scriptures, number one. First of all, it contradicts the Scriptures. There's no basis in it, or there's no basis in the Scripture for a lot of what we take for granted. And when you get back to the, and again, because in the first world, even since the Vatican Council, people have not been studying the Scriptures. And when they do, they study it for content, information, and not for conversion. And yet all of the Gospels were written for people who already believed in Jesus, but they were in sore need of conversion and repentance because they couldn't live up to the Gospel or to their baptismal promises because of the experience that they were having economically, politically, nationalistically, etc. And so many people who have studied the Scriptures, especially in the United States and other first world countries, started with evangelical Christian or Pentecostalists, and they don't read it for conversion. The understanding is that it's inspired, but in order to keep hearing the inspiration, you have to keep changing it. So when a community struggles with a text, comes up with a meaning, when you go to put it into practice, then the power begins to almost extend itself. And when you go back, you will be inspired with something else that you never even saw before because you changed. But if you don't change, and that was a nice idea, and I'm going to put it in my Sunday homily, or I'm going to do a prayer service about it, the next time you read it, it sounds just like you read it the first time, or the 101st time. And so it's, for people who don't have a lot of background in Scripture, you will begin to realize that a lot of devotion or personal spirituality is in direct conflict with the Scriptures. And the personal spirituality and devotion became so strong because people didn't read the Scriptures. You have to remember that people didn't start reading. You know, I mean, there are still places in the world where people don't know how to read and write, but they speak 2 or 3 languages, a little bit ahead of us in some schools. But they just did not read the Scriptures. Unfortunately, when Martin Luther nailed his thesis on the door of the church, he took the Scriptures with him and left us the sacraments. And we are very, very lopsided as believers that everything hinges, not even on the sacraments, just on Eucharist. And there's no balance, little or no balance, even today in the Scriptures. And yet, the Vatican Council, too, would never have happened without the Scriptures. In the 1940s, with the Divino Afflante Spiritu, they started studying it in the language that it was written in. People still speak Aramaic. They began to learn Aramaic, to learn how Jesus would have spoken and how he talked. They studied it, and then what it would have meant at the time of the Gospels. Now that was in the 40s and the 50s. And because of that research and study, the Vatican Council happened. And most of us think that the Church has incorporated a great deal of the Vatican Council, when in reality it's being squelched right and left. The Vatican Council documents are very, very clear. They say that the presence and the power of the risen Lord in the Scriptures is the power and the presence of the risen Lord in the Eucharist. Therefore, you must show the same respect to the Scriptures that you do to the Eucharist. In many, many countries outside of Western Europe and the United States, there is a saying. You can have church without Eucharist, but you cannot have church without the Scriptures, the Word of the Lord. Now, we would interpret that the exact opposite. We would say that you can have church without the Word of God, but you can't have church without the Eucharist. The understanding is, if you do not know the Word of God made flesh, dwelling among us in the world, and how it is we are to live, You don't know what you need Eucharist for. And most people have made Eucharist into a private devotion, when it is a meal celebrated publicly so that people can hold us accountable for actually becoming the good news and becoming what we eat, so that when we go out the door, people meet God in us. It's the only way they're going to do it. But that hasn't actually happened. So, especially in a lot of the exegesis that's been done in the last 50 or 60 years, which they haven't even taught in seminaries, unfortunately, in many places. They have in other countries. The scriptures, especially Matthew, Mark, Luke, John, and Acts, and the prophets, and the first 5 books of the Bible, they are referred to as the hierarchy of Scripture. First of all, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, Acts, the prophets, the first 5 books of the Bible and the Psalms override everything else in the Scriptures. Right? Because especially Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, and Acts is called the Gospel of the Spirit. That they are much closer to the actual teachings of Jesus than things that are, removed by Paul, by Peter, by James, etc. And so even Jesus in Luke's Gospel, when he opens their minds to the Scriptures, says everything written about me in the law and the prophets and the Psalms has to be fulfilled. And on the road, he opens their minds to the Scripture and all passages that have to do with him. So it's all Scripture-based, but it's very new for us. People read everything in the Old Testament and everything in the New Testament if it's all in the same way. And it isn't at all. If you could drop out everything in Paul and not lose that much. The basis of practically every Protestant denomination is based on Paul, not on the Gospels. And that's why you can change so much stuff and still say you're a believer in Jesus or a Christian, but you're contradicting things left and right, especially in regards to the law. And in regards to authority and power, Paul was a Jewish rabbi, and he never stopped being a Jewish rabbi. And he has the major problems of the Jewish community at his time, plus his own personal problems, which surfaced massively. He has trouble with marriage, right? And you add that into the fact that he thought the end was coming soon. He has trouble with sexuality. He has trouble with the normal way most people live their lives. And unfortunately, the church through the Dark Ages and the Middle Ages and all the way up to the Vatican Council not only picked that up, it deepened it and spread it and expanded on it. So most of what is normative in the church is in direct opposition to everything in the Scriptures, especially when it comes to what is holiness. The normal way, if 98.3 or 4% of the church is married, widowed or divorced or single, that might be the norm for how you become holy. Right? Might be. Right? And yet, in reality, you can count on 2 or 3 hands married couples who are saints, single people who are saints. It just isn't done. Right? And again, Benedict is making 29 new ones. Not a one in the group is a layperson. Just an ordinary person. And so the understanding that holiness, sexuality is a problem, whereas Jesus does not seem to have a lot of problems with sexuality. The only thing he says point blank in the Scriptures is don't do that again. He's very specific. Don't do that again. To a woman caught in adultery. You ever wondered how you catch 1 out of 2? Adultery? What happened to the others?
Yeah.
Well,
He's the one that told on her.
he's the one who set her up.
Yeah.
They were interested in getting Jesus on the law. It has nothing to do with what happened. And yet the church has blindly gone about this. If you read canon law in regards to marriage, it is humiliating, it is insulting, it is demeaning, not only just of women, but of sexuality, of marriage, of husband and wife, of all sorts of things. And that hasn't changed that much. And it begins to surface, especially in the areas of sexuality and anything that has to do with law, government, economics, and politics. Because the church became the Roman Empire, and it stopped being church early on. It becomes even just with what we're going to do today, you're going to have massive problems with it, right? And that's the Beatitudes. Because what the church did, and many people still do today, is they spiritualize the text. And they individualize it so it's in my head and my heart, and it has nothing to do with actual living on a day-to-day basis, being held accountable by other people. Again, you got to keep in mind that it was written to be spoken out loud in public so that everyone heard it proclaimed with you, then held you accountable for actually making it a reality, and you were supposed to hold other people accountable for making it a reality. And we've gotten that just doesn't happen. And so that's why the line, it's in Central and South America, but I've heard it in many places. A Christian is no Christian, and you cannot be wholly correct. And yet, most of the people who are canonized are priests. I mean, every pope, turn around and bingo, he's automatically gets his pope sold. When there's no real investigation into the fact that horrific things were done in his name, and he allowed it, and he even protected people who had done horrific things, and things like that. Or the founders of religious community that no one has even heard of, and certainly no one has joined in the last 30 or 40 years. It is the whole way they do saint making is an abomination. The same as the way we elect popes. It's a farce from the beginning to the end. If you read in the Acts of the Apostles, you know exactly how you choose the leadership. There's nothing, anything that leads to. In fact, it contradicts the way the Spirit operates in the church. So Matthew's gospel is dealing with this because they're breaking away from Judaism and becoming universal. So Judaism is the law, and it is enforcement of the law. And there are many, many of them, and you had to pay for every infraction of the law, and who was in control, who was in the authority powers, and that has what become what the church is. That literally the way we operate in church universally as structure is almost the way that it was at the time of Jesus with the Jewish community in regards to the law. Who was in, who was out, who was ritually unclean, who was not, etc. I mean, Jesus would come and be screaming and tearing his hair out, saying, "What are you doing? No one is unclean." This kind of stuff. And certainly no one is intrinsically disordered. And stupid, absolutely insulting things along those lines. Or the fact that in the United States, almost 60%, it's 59%, 58%, 59% of the Catholics in the United States are divorced, separated, remarried in, illicit marriages, all this. So they're not welcome at the table. Jesus gave Eucharist to everyone, including, first of all, to Judas. And Eucharist is never a reward for being good. It is the bread of hope, the bread of justice, the bread of life for people who actually need it. So, Jesus would be absolutely horrified that the majority of people in parishes all over the United States, are just not welcome at the table. It's like, you can come, but don't eat. Plus the fact that it's all been being made back into altar, priesthood, distance, don't touch. Women are so unclean they can't even clean the vessels after Eucharist. That is just insane. And it is very against that this is the last meal that I want to eat with you, my friends. Right? And so it's very clear. And he took the cup and offered it, whereas the new translation is he took the sacred chalice into his hands. Just the language itself flips the theology away from even just what the scriptures are saying. So Matthew's gospel is very hard because it reveals what's going on in our own church today. It has been going on for about the last 40, 50, 60 years. What else stuck with you?
out of here or whatever.
Well, I guess since it's the first class, I've been really motivated to not hold back as much as I might. In the past, I was stuck in the car for 4 hours with a couple of my friends, and we just started talking about current events, and that's a good thing. The death penalty discussion came up, and I just went off to the point where there was silence in the car. That was what I did now. But that's definitely something that stuck with me. It's just a motivation to not go back.
Because most people's instincts are right on. Why would Catholics who believe in a God that was crucified according to the usual capital punishment laws of his day, enacted only against Jews, believe in capital punishment? I mean, it's just absolutely mind-boggling. We just don't know that. You know, and that says how far we have come. And we try it on war, and then you're really in trouble. What else did you do some thinking or talking about or whatever?
Just being in church Sunday, I looked around how separate we are always together.
Right, exactly. People go to church, but they do not worship together. They pick the mass they're going to go to, and everybody's there, but no one is together. And again, the way they're going to change the responses, there's going to be less participation and less calling people together, and more this direct one-on-one that the priest is everything.
I think maybe your assumption is an impression. You separate the two groups when you're talking about this. One is the priest group, and the other is the lay group. In my opinion.
The church, okay, the reality is, in Jesus' church, there was no separation. Because they did not exist the way we exist now. The church, the body of Christ, is the people of God.
Yeah.
But they are not treated that way, and they certainly have no power or authority to do anything or to change anything. And that has to be...
Right now, the priesthood have a lot of power in contemporary society.
Oh, it's had that for about 1,400, 1,600 years. It has a massive power. It has, in society for the last 1,600 years, it has gained more and more and more power because it was the nation state. That the church, up until the 18th century, was everything. I mean, in Europe, we forget that when people started translating the Bible into contemporary languages in the 15th, 16th, and 17th century, they were butchered. The Methodists, all of the Protestant groups were literally butchered. Their tongues were cut out, their heads were put on pikes, to dare to let just ordinary people read the scriptures. And that is in every area that church has been taken away from the church, the people of God, and the structures control the church. And that is reality. That was the reality of the Jewish leadership, of the high priests, the scribes, the Pharisees. They literally controlled the Jewish religion. And Jesus, especially in Matthew's gospel, is totally against that. And again, in John's gospel, Jesus is out to do three things. The temple is not the center of worship, which would mean the church buildings that we go to are not the center. The sacrifice is not the center of worship, which means that Eucharist as sacrifice is not the center of worship. And the structure was not to enforce belief, but to invite and extend hope. Right? And so the reality is, the church right now does not reflect the scriptures of Jesus.
How about this? About the continuity between the world church community and the church community and the medical community, and right now, and the other continuity between the priest groups and the lay groups, because a lot of leaders in Catholic just try to combine this kind of thing right now.
All right, Jesus did not
have no power, high power right now.
All right, but the reality is Jesus is against that kind of separation of power, so to speak. And so that's what I'm talking about. And so to actually read Matthew's gospel, it's impossible not to critique the church. Yeah, that's the way it comes down.
In regards to that, like I know, like when I am up in class and I'm with like priests and nuns and lay people, when a priest comes into a room, the nuns always, or I should say always, there should be a huge generalization, but they stop speaking and they say, "Good day, Father." So even though they may not have complete power where they're making all these laws over the land by any means, there's still a power struggle that is going on even amongst the people that are in the people I go to school with, you know, a few times every day. When the priest comes into the room, the nuns all, they stop talking. I see a lot of other lay, I'm not religious, but I see the other religious people stop talking and they give service to the
And one
priest.
step past that is, if you happen to be in a church parish and the sister comes in, everybody else does the same thing, deferring to the religious people. Yeah, there is a pecking order all the way down. Now, the new deacons are a problem. Well, they're not really, you know, originally before the only way you got to be a deacon is you were there for 6 months and then you became a priest. Now, the fact that they have the permanent diaconate, and by the way, they're opening the permanent diaconate for women in the Eastern Church. The first women are going to be ordained by the old ancient fraction. Literally the prayers, everything out of the 1st century next year. In every Eastern church in the world. Right? So, but now you got permanent deacons, what do you do with them? You know, they're kind of like glorified altar boys. Well, you know, that's the way they're treated. I don't know if you know anything. They don't really have any place in it. And so, you know, they're thinking in terms of, I'm really like the priest. None of them are thinking, you're supposed to be the servants of the body of Christ. That the more power you have, the more low you're supposed to be on the rungs and the totem poles. And that is what hasn't happened. Now, we're going to do a whole day on authority and power, because that's a big question. By whose authority are you doing this? What gives you the power to do this? And the same thing is happening. I mean, the Pope comes out and says you can't even talk about changes in the structure. And he says this as though it's infallible, but it's only his idea in the last 8 years maybe. Right? And that is what happened for the last 1,600 years. And we picked it up, the accruement of whatever it is. And so it's really hard to recognize. Jesus would be absolutely appalled at what we call church and the way things operate, especially our priorities. Okay, what we're going to do, we're going to try to do 2 things today. Matthew's Gospel, if you read it through, you might try it again to read it through, and see how many people start rejecting Jesus outright. Do that before next Monday. Literally, what happens is, by the time you get halfway through the Gospel, absolutely everyone has rejected Jesus outright. The scribes, the Pharisees, the leadership of the Jewish community, the wealthy, his own family, his neighbors, even his parents, his mother rejects him outright. It's the line nobody ever uses that's in Mark and Matthew. Your mother and brother and sisters are outside, and they have come to take you away because they think he's insane. You just sort of forget that one, right? Let alone the fact that in all of them, it's your mother, father, and brothers are out. Your mother, sisters, and brothers are outside. They don't come in. He doesn't go out. And he says, no intimacy in my community. Hear the word of God. Put it into practice. Mother, brother, and sister too. But literally, by the time you get halfway through, everyone of his own is rejecting him. And what Matthew is doing is he's setting it up for Jesus to turn from the Jewish community, always inviting them in, but they do not wish to be, and then turning to the larger world and drawing them in to the kingdom. We're going to talk about the kingdom a little bit today and on Wednesday, but on next Monday we will do the kingdom, right? Because you can spend the whole day in the kingdom and just begin to get a handle on it. So, but that's what Matthew is doing in his gospel. He's setting it up for Jesus to turn and then go in an opposite direction. And the turning is almost a U-turn, so that, because this is what had happened in Matthew's church. More and more Jews left the community and stayed within the Jewish confines. The ones that did stay were fighting with the massive numbers coming in. And again, they were having major trouble with so many outsiders coming in. You have to remember, you didn't have to obey the law as a Jew, except with other Jews. So this is a massive change of relationship and everything. Now the law is for everybody. You can't say, well, I'm not doing it for you, and I'm not doing it. It's like everybody. In fact, Jesus changes, the least you can do is start here and work your way back in. Whereas they said, no, you just have to do this thing over here. So you're going to be noticing it more and more. Now, even just what we're going to do right now, the Beatitudes, we have so individualized them. Everything in the Gospels, by the way, everything, even when Jesus talks to one person, is individual. We don't pick it up because you means me. Whereas in most other languages, you can tell right away that's you. And so it's always you means everybody. And so the Beatitudes are about groups of people, not you. And you have to find out if you get yourself into any of the groups to begin with. Again, some of the translations read, blessed are you, some of them read, happy are you. Again, it's, when you do word by word translation, it can just trivialize it. Right? In Spanish, when you go into different languages, you can get a glimpse of it. In Spanish, the Biblia translation is, blessed are you, you have an advantage over everyone else if you're poor. So you have an advantage or an upper hand in the kingdom and with Jesus. And that's not exactly the way we think of it, right? We have a tendency, blessed are they, they're the passive recipients of, blessed are you, poor in spirit, blessed are you who hunger and thirst. They're on the receiving end. But Jesus spoke Aramaic, and the word is ashrei, all right? A-S-H-R-A-Y, blessed. Now, that's the way we translate it. The way he would say is, go for it. You have got the right idea. Move. I'm with you. This is the way it's supposed to be. It has nothing to do with a passive recipient. It is go for it. And go for it with everything you've got. This is it. Okay? Again, very different than the way we look at it. Even the way we do blessings, again, we think only the priest can bless. Whereas it's been normative in every religion, including ours, that anybody can bless anybody. All right? That, husbands and wives are supposed to bless each other, parents are supposed to bless their children, the elderly are supposed to bless the young are supposed to bless the elder. All this kind. Everywhere I go in other countries, when I preach or something, getting out of church is a nightmare. Well, because all the kids come up, especially in Southeast Asia, and because they have such a respect for the elderly, and now I've got white hair, I've had white hair for about 25 years, they come up and they put their hands up on my forehead, and that is their way of, bless me. But then the elderly come up the same way, and they kneel down and kiss my feet. It's like, get off the floor. I mean, they're older than me by a long shot. Get off the floor. Because that is the way they bless. Now, the blessing is, the understanding is, when you bless, you become a blessing. Does that make sense? Right? And so this is their way of connecting in with you in solidarity, so to speak. And so to them it makes it, again, because of culture, I find it very difficult. I don't, with the kids it's okay, because at this point, get up there. But I really have trouble with the elderly men and women, who have lived through hell and high water, especially in some of South America. Or even in Burma they do it. Myanmar. It humbles you so that, you're down on the floor picking them up and this sort of stuff. But again, everyone blesses, right? And it's an encouragement. It's a shot in the arm for the future, so to speak. Right? So Now, in Jesus' understanding, the 8 groups that are singled out are the privileged place of revelation, and it is where Jesus, the teacher, the crucified and risen one, is the most easily found. Okay? So this is the new place of wisdom in society. Okay? Paul VI said, if you want peace, work for justice. John the 23rd and John Paul, very early on, said, if you want peace, go to the poor. Okay? So that those who are singled out as these groups, these are the place of wisdom now. Wisdom, because this is where the kingdom is the most easily recognizable, so to speak. Now, Matthew takes an earlier version, Luke's version of the 4 blessings and the 4 woes are closer to what Jesus actually said. He went after them and then, and he did, blessed are you, and then woe to you, because they are seen best in contrast. What Matthew did is, because he's trying to create an identity for his new community, he does the 8 blessings in one chapter and saves all the woes for chapter 23, which we don't read in the lectionary cycle. We don't like it, so they just didn't put it in the lectures. If you want to go read the exact opposite of what the Beatitudes are, read chapter 23, then I can have your mind blown. And you would not want Jesus going after you. I mean, he had a tongue, as my mother would say, like a longshoreman.
Yeah.
He could curse and cuss with the best of them, and he did. And he singled out certain people to go after them. Woe unto you. All right. And again, it's like, sometimes the translation is alas, alack. It's like, he is, woe unto you, you're the end of the line, you're not even acting like human beings, etc. So the earlier version is the more powerful one in that sense. What Matthew does is, he has 8 of them, and if you, I don't know whether you noticed, the first and the last are in the present tense, and everything in the middle is in the future tense. Blessed are you who are poor in spirit, the kingdom of heaven is yours. Blessed are you who mourn and weep, you will be comforted. Blessed are the meek, they will inherit the earth. They're all in the future tense until, blessed are you when they persecute you and devise all manner of evil against you and accuse you falsely for my sake. Yours is the kingdom of God. So if you want to be in the kingdom, hands down, home free, you get yourself into either group 1 or group 6. Well, that's the way it's set up. The rest is the fullness of what one day will be a reality when the Son of Man comes in justice to judge the world. Right? But if you want to know what it's like to live in the kingdom now, you get in group 1 or you get in group 8. And we're going to do the groups and put you in them so that you'll get a feel of what it's like to be in each of the groups. Right? Now, before we do that, though, I'm going to give you a little background to kind of help you change your mind, because it's so ingrained in you what these mean, and you're so far off. The first is they are confrontational truth tellings. Right? Jesus is like bam, bam, bam. All right? They're in some ways one-word, one-line parables. So they're confrontational truth-telling. They're congratulations and encouragement. Blessed are the poor. I encourage you, stay at it. This is good, go for it. It is to persuade and exhort. If you're not in one of those groups, you're in trouble. Get thyself into a group. Okay? It reveals the values of Matthew's community. Those 8 groups reveal 8 basic values of what it meant to be a Christian. In the early days, when you went to confession, you only went for biggies. We're going to deal with this on Monday. But there were 8 marks of a Christian. There are the 8 groups. And so when you went to Eucharist, to reconciliation, you looked at how you had failed in those 8 marks or characteristics or values of being a member of a community. Right? So it reveals what it means to be in the kingdom, to be a believer and follower of Jesus. It is the new center of gravity in the world. The world, whether it knows it or not, has shifted to these people. Because these are the people of the kingdom. Whether or not, Jesus' first words, repent and believe the good news, the kingdom is close at hand. All right, how close is close at hand? Stick out your hand. The kingdom of heaven is close at hand. Are you in it? Stick out your hand. Come on, this is not a rhetorical whatever. Stick out your hand. The kingdom of heaven is close at hand. How close is it? Usually, as Americans, you stick out your hand and get something. Anybody else sticks out your hand to grab a hold of another hand. And the kingdom of heaven is as close at hand as these 8 groups of people. Close at hand. Another way of translating the kingdom of heaven is near is it's like, when you're driving in a car and they have these signs when there are mountains around, beware of falling rocks. That's exactly what it means. The kingdom is like this rock that is already in motion and it's going to fall on you. So move it. Again, Jesus, our name only has 9,000 words. So it is a very gutsy, visceral, in-your-face language. And we have cleaned them up because Greek is classical and philosophical and all this sort of stuff. Jesus, when he talked, he had a vocabulary that would scare whatever's like, what is that? Right? And so this is the way it is. It's so close, it's tangible, it's flesh and blood. Close. Hand is a big word in the scriptures. Hand it over. Right? All kinds of things with your hands. So this is how close it actually is. It's also got the idea in it, repent or else. If you're not hungry and thirsting for justice, your day is coming. Again, it's kind of underneath there, but it's in there. It is, again, preparation for dire consequences. There is going to be the Son of Man who comes with justice for the nations. And you've got to be prepared because he's warning you way ahead of time what the criteria for the justice and the judgment is going to be. And keep in mind the big sheep and goat story in Matthew. When did we didn't know this? And that doesn't get you off. It's who you hang around with, you're going down with, and you're going up with, so to speak. It is a relationship to God that is privileged and honored. You basically are honored if you can get yourself in one of those groups. Even though, generally speaking, they don't know. Because, again, you're talking about masses of numbers of people in the world who have never heard Christianity or in these groups. But as Christians, if we are going to follow Jesus, then we know that this is an honor, this is a privilege. This gives us intimacy with Jesus that other people don't have. The understanding is you pass it on. Just like any kind of a blessing, if you read any of the Old Testament blessings, from one generation to the next, from one family member to the next, from one, this sort of thing. So the understanding is that by being in the group, you pass it on. You pass it on to others, you pass it on to individuals that, it's like what's the kid that did the thing, 6 relationships away from, 6 degrees of separation. That once you're in this group, it snowballs and really connects absolutely everybody to everybody else. Just because you don't see the connections doesn't mean you're not there. And that some people can, and these folks can, see the connections. It's called the mother lode of tradition. Again, this is Jesus' first big teaching segment. Everything else in the gospel shows you what it's like to be poor, to mourn, to weep, to be hungry and thirst for justice. All the parables are about this. All of his sermons are about this. Every person he singles out and has some sort of an encounter with, they literally are based on these 8 groups. Because these are the folks who are the kingdom, so if you want to get into it, then you have to learn to recognize the work. So that's why it's called the mother learning tradition. Basically it says, hang on, endure. This is a moment of grace if you're in this group, because a lot of people fall into these groups. It's, you know, most of us are not too big on getting into them. Choosing. All right. The poor of its very nature includes those who mourn and weep, those who are meek, and those who are hungry. They're almost one group because one led to the other. Right? We'll go through who the poor are later. The Beatitudes are God's revelation that there is always deeper mercy for those who are involved in deeper human misery. The deeper the human misery, the deeper the love, the deeper the compassion that God has for his people. Therefore, if we believe in this God and we follow this God, then this is the way we are to act in relation to him. Now, again, what I'm going to do is read you this twice. It will be in 2 groups. Okay? We'll start back there. Now listen carefully. Blessed are the poor in spirit. Play with that. Find out what it is. The kingdom of heaven is yours. You're in it. Right? You over here. Blessed are you who mourn and weep. You will be comforted. Over here. Blessed are you who are meek. I'm going to help you out. The word means non-violent. You will inherit the earth. Blessed are you who hunger and thirst for holiness, righteousness, and justice. In the Old Testament, they are 3 interchangeable words. Holiness is the justice of God. The justice of God makes you righteous. So you will be satisfied. What you're getting is very important, right? You're going to get comforted, you're going to inherit the earth, and you're going to be satisfied, but you got it. You got the kingdom. So now, struggle with each other. And guys, you know, these are the folks that are already in the kingdom, right?
Clearly.
Blessed are the poor in spirit, for the kingdom is already theirs. Who is the poor in spirit? What is it like to be poor in spirit, etc. Because in Luke's gospel, it's just plain old poor. Poor in spirit.
Complicate things.
What'd you come up with? Good or bad?
I think we recognize that the poor and the poor in spirit have been used historically to describe different groups, but there can be a common denominator,
There is
and that
a
is,
difference.
and the poor seem to, when our students go on service trips and the like to countries, that they're always blown away by the generosity, the contentment that the poor seem to have with the little that they possess versus what they have as wealthy, Americans, and so. The poor have achieved some sort of spirituality, some sort of recognition of their absolute dependence on God, that we admire, that we're drawn to, and that our hope is that we can be at least poor in spirit as people who may be a little wealthier.
See, now that's what we keep reverting back to. You have a spirit, yes? You got a body, you got a spirit, you got a soul. If you don't have a spirit, where are you?
You don't exist.
Your spirit departs. You did. So it means, blessed are the poor in fact. Body, soul, mind, heart, everything. Flesh and blood and bone and whatever. And again, because of theology and philosophy, only the Greeks can separate out the fact that, you can have a body and soul and they're not necessarily connected in any way, shape, or form. Or if you're poor in spirit, you can be poor but you're not attached to all the stuff you got. Sweet spirit. As the kids in Latin America would say still. Right? It's ridiculous, and anybody who's poor knows it's ridiculous. If you're poor, you're poor. Right? If you look up poor in the dictionary, it'll give you someone or a group of people lacking in the basic necessities of human life. food, water, clothing, shelter, medicine, healthcare, human dignity, a job, education, all that kind of stuff. What we call the corporal works of mercy. And it has nothing to do with the corporal works of mercy. They are the works of justice. If you read Pacem in Terris, the first long 2 paragraphs in Pacem in Terris by John the 23rd, is that there are 19 rights of justice that every human being deserves just by being a human being. And it's food, water, clothing, shelter, medicine, healthcare, dignity, the right to wish. Go through them all. And they're adding in a new one to make it 20 even. The right to immigrate. So trying that this is a natural human right. You're not stuck wherever you find yourself. So again, if you don't have a spirit, then you're dead. Right? So it's impossible to be poor in spirit without being actually poor in fact, or getting poor. We don't like to hear that. No, not in any way, shape, or form. So, and we admire what they have, but really, would you join them? No. So you don't admire them. You haven't a clue what makes them tick. Generally speaking, because again, if you admire someone, you want to be like them, you want to share their life. It's like, don't want to do.
I think one of the things we're trying to say, though, so much of the church's effort goes into trying to pull people out of material poverty, and that, or should, certainly certain groups within the church do that.
Again, certain groups. You've got to be careful about that, because the United States Church is the richest religious group in the United States and has been for 18 years. We are the richest religious group. On top of that, we are dead last of every religious group in what we give to the poor. So the majority of people in the church are not doing one thing to pull people out of poverty. In fact, American Catholics are the richest religious group, the most mean-spirited, selfish, quote, spiritual group around, but they have nothing to do with pulling the poor out. They don't even share their excess. We have this incredible idea of how generous Catholics are. Our parents might have been, but this crew ain't. Hasn't been for a long time. You can go online, Daddy Diocese, and find out what people do. And it's not even a buck. So, it isn't even a Starbucks. Well, that's what it comes down to. So there are groups. There are groups in every religion. And there are groups of people who don't even believe in religion, who sometimes do more work to alleviate poverty than any religion does. And some other religions are very good at doing it. What's it like? Blessed are the poor in spirit, the kingdom is yours.
It's a great difficulty.
You betcha, it's a great difficulty.
Because you have to be free yourself from every attachment. You don't free, you don't have nothing. You don't have
every attachment, even living, because poverty puts you on the edge all the time. I mean, if you're lacking one of the basic necessities of life, and if you're lacking one, you're usually lacking 2 or 3. If you don't have water, then you don't usually have medical care either. One child goes blind, every minute in the world. I mean, hunger, I mean, in the time we've just talked, hundreds of thousands of people have died of hunger. Most people never have a chance at life. The statistics are absolutely mind-boggling. We're about to hit 7 billion people. We're 6.9 something at this point. So in the next 3 or 4 years, we're going to hit 7 billion people in the world. More than 3 billion of them have no access to clean water now. It's getting worse all the time. Half of them, 4 billion, go to bed hungry every night. But again, this is like so far away from us in many ways. It's incredibly difficult. You have to not be attached to anything, anyone, life itself. Because you just can't. And so, in that sense, it can often be more precious. Sometimes it can. Sometimes it may. poor and bitter just like anybody else. You know, that they've never had a chance at life, and they can get very angry with good reason. But we don't think of Jesus getting angry for the same things. And they can be very generous. And they can also rob you blind. They're just like anybody else. You gotta learn to, what kind of group you're with. Literally, they're gonna rob you blind. And then they blame their own mother for what happened. But they also can, when you go to visit them, they'll feed you their food and they don't eat it. They're hospitable, people. Once you are in with them, you in like kin. You are blood kin. Closer than blood kin. You join the family. What else is it like to have the kingdom now? You want it now? Not too sure, huh? Everybody loves Francis. Here we are meeting in Francis of Assisi Church. Lady Poverty. You court poverty? Not in our culture. Not in anybody's culture. It's always more, rather than less. The poor do teach you right away what you need in order to survive. I went to India the first time. I was there for about 3.5 months. People said, could you put in one sentence what you learned in India? I said, give me a little time to think about it. But what I learned in India is what is the least you can live on so that other people can live. What is the absolute least you need to live on so that other people can have a chance to live. That's not simply so that others might simply live. That's massive jumps beyond that. It's the least you need.
But there is a problem somehow in the interpretation of these realities, because in South America, particularly in my country or other places, many people, including politicians and very wealthy companies, use poverty as a tool to fulfill his own intentions or purpose. And they go to the government, they go to the mine, they destroy everything, they throw people out, and they always love the poor people. Say, what kind of love you have? Because they always use the poor to achieve his own goal.
Right, that is.
And you see in Peru now, people dying because they make many things.
Church
The Amazon,
Church
yes.
did it and still does it in many places. If your life is really bad now, you got it.
And people use it.
And
That's
it's
the
still
point.
used everywhere. Oh,
Yeah.
They take it and fundamentally interpret it so that if you were poor, that's okay. And again, riches were a blessing from God, whereas the gospel is very clear. Woe to you who are rich. You've had it. You've had it already. And yet, Christians are the richest group. Catholics are the richest group in the United States. It doesn't seem to bother us. We got it now. We won't get it then. So these have been used and are still being used for the exact opposite understanding of what they are. We're going to go through who's poor. If you ever can find a book, it's out of print. It was put out by Orbis. It's called The Gospel of the Oppressed by Elsa Tamez, T-A-M-E-Z. She's, where does she teach? She teaches in Brazil, but she is Costa Rica. And The Gospel of the Oppressed is a small book, and she goes through the words poor, indigenous, all the words we use for people who are poor, and does every piece in the Old and New Testament and what it meant under the law, what it meant within the prophets, what it meant at the time of Jesus. It'll change the way you read the scriptures for the rest of your life. We have made it into all kinds of other things. She nails it exactly of what it means to be poor. Right? Now, this is the poor. Those that are so wretched, way past human misery, right? Those who are so wretched they are forced to beg and are inevitably always hungry and always lacking human dignity, and therefore always mourning their life. That's it. And that includes those who mourn and those who are hungry. Right? Hunger and thirst. How long can you go without food? How long can you go without water? Water, 8 days max, and it's a terrible way to die. Food, you can go, the majority of people in the world die of slow starvation. That is still that is how everybody dies. They just never have a chance. Everyone is hungry all the time. I used to go to Latin America, and I was so stupid in the beginning, and I'd say something like, well, when was the last time you ate? And they'd say, Tuesday. It was Friday. I mean, we're talking, most people live meal to meal, whereas there's another group that lives day to day, whereas first world has so much excess, we eat 5-6 times a day, and, snacking and throwing food away. But that's poor. You're inevitably always hungry, always thirsty. Okay? And this includes the mourn. Another word for mourn is pity. Nobody wants pity. But if you're poor, you'll take the pity. Ain't taking it. Okay? We want compassion, You gotta look at each other face to face. If you're poor, you'll take anybody's pity, you'll take anything they give out. Okay? Jesus has pity on the crowds. And they change it to compassion, but pity is a very specific word that we'll deal with. Okay? Their life, they mourn at their life, the systems, the way it is, because that's the way it's always been, and this is the way things are done, and that this is inhuman and horrific, and they have no future no way out. So they mourn the fact that they're stuck in this hole, and the hardest thing to deal with is other good religious people who have no qualms with them being there, and worse, blame them for being there. And again, in the 60s and 70s and 80s in the States, it was the deserving poor in the undeserving poor. As if anybody deserves to go without medical and health care, to go without food and water and nothing. Now again, this is mourning group. The meek, the nonviolent, the humble, they are in there because of what they do. We'll get to that, so we'll skip that. That's the first group of poor. Then there is the economically poor in what we would call the indigent, right? The folks who, you reach a certain age, you lose your ability to take care of yourself. During the, it's like people who live on the street, the bums. Again, we have all kinds of terminology for them, right? They're lazy. Most of them happen to be vets coming back from wars that don't get help, hit the streets, that sort of thing. The largest, fastest growing group on the street is women with children in the United States. Okay? So they're economically poor. They are reduced to borrowing and stealing. That's passive income. You know what borrowing rate is? You understand that. Usury used to be a mortal sin up until the 1930s. Suddenly it stopped being a mortal sin in the 1930s. That was one that should come back. Steal, and literally so stealing. They are the sick, the maimed, the blind, the lame, no one supported by family, widows. And at the time of Matthew's Gospel, the Jerusalem community, because everybody hit the road, collected money for the Jerusalem community. Because even Paul, in every one of his churches, takes collection for the Jerusalem community. They could not keep themselves going. They were the lowest of the low. That's when the church moves from Jerusalem to Rome, and now, of course, it's the richest of the rich. So that's the economically poor. Then there are the social outcasts. Right? Very easy to get into this group. It's very crowded. Right? Anybody with a disease, a physical disease. So you could get sick and then get out of the room. If you got healed with it, right? Physical disease, any kind of infirmity, and again, you were judged to be in that group because you were sinners. You were being punished for something you did or didn't do, your family did or didn't do, that sort of stuff. You were unclean. that means women were in the group automatically for at least 12 to 15 days out of the month. And the whole time they were pregnant, and up to 4 months after they gave birth. If you were infertile, the opposite extreme, you also were in there. We used to have that. Well, you know, this is the way it operates. Anybody you demonize, the way we treat the gay and lesbian transgender community, we demonize them. They're intrinsically disordered enough. That is exactly what it means to demonize. The way we deal with the Islamic community, everybody, you know, they're out to kill us, and it's the only thing it is. And the ignorance here is they don't think of anybody who looks Middle Eastern as terrorists. And that's anybody you demonize. And if you were in any of the following jobs, your profession could put you in this group. Obviously, prostitutes, right? Shepherds. Shepherds have great PR when it comes to King David and Moses and the Good Shepherd and all kind of stuff, but in fact, they were considered thieves and low life, and you know what they do with the sheep and that sort of stuff. I mean, they were really, that's why the fact that in Luke's gospel, the shepherds are the first ones to get the same message that Mary gets, and a much longer one, and they come back and teach Mary and Joseph. Highly insulting. This is who gets the abuse. Shepherds, dirty, whatever. Now, anybody who was a pig herder was in that group, and pigeon keepers. They're not sure. Now, pig herders, everybody knows why, because pork is unclean and that sort of stuff. But pigeon keepers, they're not sure why they're in there. But anybody who would raise pigeons once outside, they belong in there. That's what most people say. All right? So that would put you in. All right? So, think about all the people in the human race this covers. We've covered quite a bit here, right? Then poor. This is when we get a little bit of theology. Those who know their need for God, the remnant specifically in Luke's community, they wait for the Messiah to bring justice and peace to the world. That is what it means that you know your need for God. It means your values are God's values. God's values and priorities are yours. Which is a little harder than saying, oh, I know my need for God. It's like, you push a little bit. It was Jesus' disciples, the group that lives on the road as itinerant. Remember, I think we're about to run, actually, I'm writing a book on Mark's Gospel, so I just finished a bit where you hit the road, and, no sandals and no extra tunic, no money in your belt, and this kind of stuff. They lived as itinerant preachers, relying on other people's hospitality and the Jerusalem church to keep them on the road. In Luke's Gospel, this is very clear. It's not so clear in Matthew. There are two churches in Luke. One is the itinerant folk on the road, and the other is the Jerusalem community that is incredibly poor but at least stable. And they keep the folks on the road moving. So that, again, if you belong to a stable community, then your generosity is unlimited. Absolutely unlimited in order to take care of those people. Then anyone who align themselves publicly in solidarity, which means you advocate on behalf of them, you stand up for them, you go down with them usually, you push your privilege. I'll, make sure this guy is fine, get him a job. I'll co-sign his loan for him, get him out of whatever. All right. This is what is called, we call it the preferential option for the poor. Bad translation. It is the imperative of the gospel. It is good news to the poor. When we sing the song everyone loves, God hears the cry of the poor, the understanding is, first of all, because there are so many of them, it's so loud, nobody else is listening. So God hears the cry. Now, when you start doing this kind of stuff toward the bottom, it puts you into group number 8. Because if you stand up for the poor, if you lobby on their behalf, if you align yourself with them, you're going to eventually go the way of them. Right? So, the more you are in solidarity publicly, then the more, and usually they take you in, and they say, oh yeah, they're one of us. You know, they may not look like it, but they're really one of us. And the last one is you're open to the word, to conversion, radical conversion of your life, and then to atone for what you did before you practiced the good news, and versus those who are resistant or antagonistic to the gospel and to the teachings of Jesus. So if you're in any of these groups, you poor. Now the trick is, how do you get yourself into that group? If you want to be in the kingdom now. If not, you can start over here. You can be. Okay? You folk. Blessed are those who mourn and weep, they will be comforted. What makes you weep and mourn?
We talked about loss, and sort of multiple levels of loss, how loss of loved ones, something close to you, but then also Fred brought up the point about loss for others, like lamenting for perhaps the poor, seeing somebody in the subway, or maybe children or your school teacher, so being aware of those around you, perhaps what they have lost and going on their behalf.
Everyone deals with mourning. I mean, you lose a dream, you lose a job, you lose a wife, you lose a husband, you lose your marriage, you lose your kids, you go driving, you deal with. Everybody deals with that. It isn't until you deal with someone else's reasons for mourning that you do your own. That you go. All of these are on behalf of others. Always. See, there's a line in the book of Exodus. It's in chapter 1. It's in it's after the new Pharaoh came who did not know Moses. Did not know the Israelites. It says, Moses grew up and saw the sufferings of his people. In Israel, that is the characteristic of what it means to be an adult. That you begin to see and deal with the sufferings of human beings. That begins to put you in the group of blessed are they who mourn, for they shall be comforted. And so it can be a total stranger. But again, it's not a feeling. The feeling has to be put into some sort of practice. So that, okay, people on the street all the time, what do? You know, do you do something with Catholic work? Do you do something with, people on the street, like myself? The people who lose, in national disasters and things. What are you going to do? Now, we have a tendency to rise to national disasters on a regular basis. No, that's the thing too. It's how do we do this for people who mourn their entire life because there's no way out? Do we actually do it? That's why those who mourn are in the same group as those who are poor. It's like the more we become aware of them, what do we do? And so, again, get into solidarity in some ways with these groups. Now, again, you got to start someplace. And you usually don't notice anybody from the next to the groups on down until you do this one. This group is overwhelming, but again, because it covers so many people, but you can enter in at any point along here. It's always, what do you do with others? And again, you can't really do very much alone. So, who do you do it with? That's why the early church was described twice in the first 5 chapters of Acts, but in Didache, everything. See how those Christians love one another. Everybody loves that line. See how those Christians love one another. It's the first half of the sentence. See how those Christians love one another. There are no poor among them. Totally changes what you think love is. And we've done the psychology routine and the spirituality. If the more poor there are in any area, the less Catholics and Christians there are. That's staggering. See how those Christians, if you love, no poor, it's not to be tolerated. You cannot abide. If you are the brothers and sisters of Jesus, the beloved children of God, how can you abide anyone within 100 miles of you, living like an animal or a dog? I mean, sometimes dogs are treated better than some of the folk on the streets. So if you're going to deal with the mourn part, what makes you weep uncontrollably? Death is always. So death can lead us into compassion. It's like that when we talked about storytelling. Why is it that suffering and death makes some people incredibly bitter, and yet it opens people's hearts on other levels? So any kind of death, every kind of suffering, that kind of stuff. I mean, even when 9/11 happened, people flocked to the churches. And by November, back to the same. So it's who do we mourn with? When you deal with people, do they ever think of you as being one of them when it's obviously you're not one of them? But other people, because of the way you live your life, start thinking it. That's the way you get into one. And usually, if you don't do it by people you live with, then usually you're in a debate where it's like, it's hurts. All kind of manner of evil against you falsely and persecute you and all this sort of stuff. You're in. All right, meek folk. Meek, non-violent. You're going to inherit the earth. You know what Don Melda said? He hates that beatitude because in reality the only earth they're going to inherit is 6 foot, which is like very...
We had issues with it. It was hard.
And this is the main teaching of Jesus. Main teaching of Jesus laid out. Okay, what's it like, meet folk? Again, you can find folk right away in those, in all the groups. It's almost easier to peg the people who are with them. Okay, Gandhi is definitely in there. And notice they all end up in group 8.
Yes. Yes. Inherit the earth with righteous children. How you inherit the earth without some power? So this is a different kind of power.
Cesar Chavez said this was his attitude, along with the farm workers. Anybody who deals with food, anybody who deals with the earth, the seasons, with crops. Again, the majority of people, who work in plants that, do the food, whatever, pick it, whatever, the earth.
So they're talking about earth.
Literally earth. And so someday that will be appreciated. I mean, again, they're in the poor section because, they don't even eat the food to harvest.
And I was interpreting it to mean the kingdom. So
Again, the kingdom, wherever you find these groups of people, you know what the kingdom looks like right away. So if you ever worked with farm workers, even Arlo Guthrie would say, I grew up not knowing what head lettuce looked like. And then somebody said, would you like some grapes? And I said, I've never had a grape. Because, if you were in solidarity with farm workers, you didn't eat lettuce, any kind of lettuce, and you didn't eat grapes, any kind of grapes. Or you didn't drink the wine that came from those vineyards. Right? Because that's what the kingdom looks like, is Cesar Chavez's folk. The farm workers out in the field and people, working on behalf of them, and anybody who lives in solidarity with them, that's what the kingdom looks like. If you can't eat it, why can't you eat it? But at the same time, you've got to make sure you get a chance.
But those people, that we talked about here,
They took it to a national level.
well, they were not such weak people. And as you,
Again, what is meek? Meek is non-violent. That's what the word means. Meek is humble. Humble means you know exactly who you are and what you're not, but you also tell the truth about it up front. Okay? Again, we have this idea, meeky Moses. We even use the term, like nobody wants to go, she's very meek. But if you are very non-violent, I had somebody call me the other day who has it. I finally heard from Randy Mounts Doubleday, the people who have my book, like a hammer shatters rock. He said, I said 5 Hail Marys, Catholic, he didn't practice. He picked up the phone, he said, I said 5 Hail Marys before I called you. He said, and I was terrified. He said, I heard you take a breath on the other end of the phone. He hasn't been in touch with me in 9 months. I said, remember, I'm not violent. He said, shit. Well, you understand, he is non-violent. You know how to be pushy. You know how to speak the truth. You got nothing to lose. And on occasion you can even be rude. I mean, Jesus is about as rude as the days. We have made Jesus into such a washed out, listless person that has no personality and but he gets angry big time. And he gets angry about these groups that anybody can say they believe in God. I'm not sure it's more about this. Loving children of God have to grow up with this kind of stuff. That's why he says, I want you to heaven everywhere. So again, nonviolent. And you have to train in nonviolence. You have to train not to react. Not to spit when you get spit. If somebody spits in your face, not to spit back. If somebody punches you, you don't punch back. That kind of stuff. It is a discipline and a training. And so it is, not to be violent, not to harm anyone or anything.
I just think about all the churches in the Middle East, like in Lebanon, they end up becoming violent because they massacre so many times.
Right, and therefore that's partly our fault because we keep putting the arms in there and not dealing with the fact that they're being massacred by, quote, very religious people, whether they happen to be Jews or Christians or Muslims or whatever. And so, yeah, it's incredibly hard to get massacred over and over again and not react violently.
And if we go into the church service, they're very Christian and they're very loving, there's a community, but they all have a gun in their houses.
Right, again, so it's easy to say that. What about us?
Right.
What have we done in the last 10 years? What have we spent on wars where we, it's easy to see with them. We call ourselves Catholics and Christians, and we're very good. I mean, and not only that, now we're cutting every program in creation to make people poorer, lose their homes, lose their lands, get beat. We're making poor people by the zillions. Right? So it's always easy. One of the rules in the script, when you get the rules for the scriptures, that's in not guiding women and children, thou shalt not use the scriptures on anybody else but thyself and in a group. Because it's always easy to see where somebody else isn't doing it. But we are the cause of most of the war in the world. What we give to Israel, what we do around, I mean, even, where we are, but it is all connected to economics big time. And again, we don't even look at it. We don't need to make all these massive cuts and all this sort of stuff. All we have to do is pull out of where we're in all these wars. I mean, what was the last 680 billion? No, trillion. That's kind of a waste of money. Spend that much money just to kill. And destroy and, create a group of people that all they know is that we bomb them or we can, send drones in after them or whatever.
Well, it's even more than that. It's like it builds up this idea that, we want some hostility to come in because then all of these people that are going to be able to be protected once hostilities come in, they are the ones that are able to create businesses, but then they are going to be able to receive contract money to be able to get tons of money to build up their countries. And not only the wars that we have going that are considered wars, but how many contract agents are throughout all of Africa protecting Africa, South America, Asia, protecting all of these companies to be able to protect their mining, their oil, their minerals. Those are wars that we don't know about. It's because there's contract people that are in there, not for the most part, the ones that are on the lines protecting these lands that are there are not even the American contract workers that do actually get decent money. It's those from the countries that are actually the ones still killing the other, their long lost brothers, you know, their long lost sisters from someplace else, and we don't even know about that. So it's even beyond
But
Afghanistan and
we're
Iraq.
definitely beyond all of it. We are the root cause of all of it. Even the food issues in Africa. They went in and decided they're going to raise rapeseed here, they're going to raise this here. And the land just couldn't hold it. They just can't do it. So they're struggling with just how do you get the land back so you can actually plant food. So you can see where this becomes incredibly dangerous. That this is a world shift into the kingdom. This is what it's supposed to look like. Then you understand why they did everything to wipe out Christians for the first 300 years, and why the only way Constantine could deal with them was to make everybody a Christian so nobody could tell who was. And he baptized everyone. He took the cross, turned it into a sword, and turned it into the Roman Empire. And we have betrayed Christianity ever since. Karl Rahner, before he died, 2 years before he died, I think it was 82 or so, he wrote a long article on why the Spirit has departed from Western civilization, Western Europe, and the United States. It's very long, and it's printed, it was originally printed by Sheldon Ward in a book, along with Prayer and the Power of the Spirit. But he literally lists for 6 or 7 pages all the ways that Catholics and Christians have betrayed the gospel. And he says the Spirit has left North America, the Spirit has left Northern Europe, and it will not return until it does penance and atones for what it did in the name of Christianity. It's staggering. And this is early 1980s. Just absolutely staggering that, people who can see the truth and lay it out, and yet, everybody reads Karl Rahner and all his theological investigations there, but they don't, take it to heart like some of this stuff. Again, and we don't think Christianity is all that dangerous because we don't practice it. Okay, so you have all the poor folk over here. Then you get over here. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for justice, righteousness, and holiness. They will be satisfied. What did you come up with? There's always a hinge in everything in the gospel. This is hinge. There are 3, hinge 3. What did you come up with? Okay, this is deep desire. It's like, how often do you want to eat? How often do you want to drink water? This is the way you have to eat, sleep, and drink. Righteousness, justice, holiness. And you cannot separate out personal holiness from justice for all. That's why if you do not care about other people, there's no way to hold. And holiness makes you more and more attuned to the poverty, to the lack, to the mourning, to the way people actually live, and it rips your heart. Absolutely rips your heart. What else did you come up with besides you really have to want it with everything you got?
One example I mentioned was my sister's brother-in-law was involved with the poor and unfinancial years. Right? They left their jobs and went right there and taught different skills to help them lift them up this extreme.
Now again, there are lots of ways to do this individually. This is to be the priority of the church. The body of Christ, everybody. You don't need a new church. You don't need a new retreat house. You do not need a new seminary while people are starving to death. Or the seminary is sitting empty while people are on the street. This, again, individuals can do lots of things. But this is what this is about is, blessed are all of you together who hunger and thirst for justice. This is a characteristic of the followers of Jesus. we've so individualized it. This is the power that moves Rome in less than 300 years. Fight that. By killing them off, and that didn't work. It's much easier to subvert something from underneath inside out than it is to just keep killing.
Awareness too.
And this is, it's harder even to get into this group because you need an awareness of what's going on in the world. And a lot of people don't want to be made aware of what's going on in the world. They're too wrapped up in their own lives. You know? I mean, I do a lot of work with Maryknoll, and they went through a period of time where the Maryknoll magazine in Maryknoll was supported by people who sent in $1 every month. Right? Because more and more, the magazine is now in Spanish as well as in English. People write in and say, cancel my subscription. I don't want to see people starving and hungry. I have enough problems in my life. That really, I mean, it's very hard to get in because people don't do well with lots of information. And so it's easier to deal with individual stuff than it is to deal with massive information of kind of poverty for people. And that everyone is poor because somebody made them that way. Here's them. And that is an insult to God. If you take a vow of poverty, everyone's supposed to practice the virtue of poverty, right? And that is that you share what you have with others and that you do not live attached to anything, and you certainly don't amass and collect. That's the virtue of poverty, and there's no limit to how you can do that. That's what Francis started to do. Then if you take a vow of poverty in a religious community, your public lifestyle is to be such that you are an alternative, a recognizable, visible alternative to the dominant culture and the dominant standard of living and the dominant form of everything. Now again, I don't know anybody in any religious community that the vow of poverty means a dang thing. Most people, even in service to other people, live better than the people they're serving by a long shot. And again, they have better health care than people who are paying for their health care, this kind of stuff. So that's the vow of poverty. Then there is the option for the poor, the imperative of the gospel. Now, I've worked with a number of religious communities around the world, and they were trying to decide as a group whether or not they were going to make a public commitment to the imperative of the gospel. And in every single religious community, it has been the same thing. The older the group, the more they say yes, and anybody under the age of 60 says no. That they would focus their attention and all of their resources and their lands and property and education and whatever towards one or two specific groups that they would align themselves with, which is what every religious community originally started with. One of the groups was the Mercy people, and it was the Mercies in Ireland. And the Mercies in Ireland had a lot to work with because up until they went to the Euro, the punt in Ireland, a 5-pound note had the founder of the Mercy Sisters on the bill. And she would say that we would always go to Mercy because she would only have one 5-pound note because you could always find her at the poor. Well, they were just oh, yeah. I said, well, even make a 20-pound note, make it go up a little bit. And we're not talking about 200-300 years ago with the Mercy. We're talking about people all the way up to the present day. But again, it's, we just don't want to deal with this kind of stuff. But again, this is what the community of Matthew and of Mark and of Luke and Jerusalem and Ephesus and all these places were known by. The gospel was written for people who were having trouble doing this, like us. Now these are the first four. Now again, we have really messed up the next ones, but they build on each other, as you can see. Right? Now after justice, would you like God to treat you justly? If you died today, would you like to be justly judged for what you have done and not done?
Mercy, please.
Well,
Very you.
right. So blessed are the merciful, because they will be shown mercy. Now, if you want to be treated mercifully, How mercifully have you treated others? The best story I ever heard about mercy is something that actually happened. Abraham Lincoln, during the Civil War, used to go for walks every evening, and he'd walk in downtown D.C. with everybody around, didn't have all the security stuff they have now, and he'd come up and talk to people. And of course, all they talked about was the war. And one night, as he was walking, as the sun was going down, this woman came up to him. He was a very tall man. So she had a cane. She was beating him with the cane, screaming and yelling at him. And he just stood there and let her do it. And she was crying and screaming, and she said, "You cannot do this." He was going to give amnesty to the South. And she said, "You cannot do that. You cannot be merciful to them. They must be treated justly. They must be punished." She said, "I have 4 sons and they're all dead. They will have died in vain if you do not kill them. If you do not keep them out of the Union, if you cannot forgive them, you can't treat them mercifully. They don't deserve it." And he finally took the cane from her. He said, "Madam, if they deserved it, it wouldn't be mercy. Give back the cane. If you deserve it, it's not mercy. Mercy is what you don't deserve under any circumstances, no matter what. And so, if you're going to be treated with mercy, you've got to be merciful to others. Now, when I do this whole thing on some of the parables, I think I'll go back to justice. Because as hard as justice is with each other, it's a lot easier than being merciful to one another. And so, if you get to the justice part, hunger and thirst for justice for everyone, yet you will be satisfied. Hidden in each of the Beatitudes is, don't ever be satisfied. Don't ever be satisfied with the way the world is, with the economic system, with politics, with war, with terrorism, with what people are doing. Don't ever be satisfied. And then, again, you can't get to mercy until you've been through some of this. That you begin to treat everyone with mercy. And again, especially little things, okay, that's one thing. Big things is another. Big things is where mercy starts to come. Alright, then the next one. This one has been really messed up all over the place. Blessed are the pure of heart, otherwise known as the single-hearted and the single-minded. Right? For they shall see God. Right? What does it mean to be pure of heart, single-hearted and single-minded? Do you eat, sleep, and drink the kingdom? Do you single-heartedly eat, sleep, and drink the scriptures like Joseph goes to bed and dreams them? What is the single-hearted, single-minded most thing that rules your entire life? Most of us have about priority list of about 5%. And God might be in there, but definitely not number one, kind of down ways in the list. So single-minded and single-hearted, like Jesus was. Only one thing. Jesus is interested in 3 things that are one. What constitutes true worship of God? Care of the poor, coming into the kingdom of justice and peace. Kingdom of justice, and that they're all one thing. We take care of the poor, the kingdom comes. And the kingdom of justice and peace and living in it, that's the only worship God wants. Right? These get progressively harder. Yeah, as you see this, right? Well, this is it, you know. Then, blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called the children of God. Again, Catholics should be the forefront of every place in the world that needs peace. San Eligio community. You've ever heard of them in Italy, the San Eligio community? They are there everywhere. They lived in Madagascar for 6 years. They brokered the peace between the fighting groups. All right, they go to all the places, Lebanon. They live with the people and they broker the peace. You know, and literally, children of God are peacemakers.
What is that name again?
San Eligio. It's E apostrophe. How does it go? San apostrophe E-G-G-I-D-O. I'll have to look it up. San Eligio.
Or Ignatius. Is it or Ignatius?
Oh, no. It
No.
has nothing to do with Ignatius is war up the young. Okay, everything in the Ignatian spirituality is militaristic. You know, this is a community that is only, it's maybe 30 years old, works out of the slums in Rome, but it is worldwide, and they literally go to countries to broker peace. Taizé sponsors them often. Okay. You know, and they do, you know, they work with groups all over the world, people from 19 to about 38, but they study the scriptures for conversion and move into places and literally do the work of making peace. They get harder and harder. And then the last one. Blessed are you when they persecute you, do all manner of evil against you, they falsely accuse you. The kingdom is yours. Rejoice, because your reward will be very great in heaven, because that's the way they treated the prophets before. Now all these groups make up the kingdom, but they also were the community of life. And therefore meant to be the church in the United States, the church in South Korea, the church in Venezuela, the church in, you know, all the other places. I don't know, what country are you from?
Ghana.
Ghana. Right? This should be the church in Ghana. Right? And utterly recognized it. The company you keep. They went off in his company. Very first chapter, they all go off in his company. This is what the company looks like. So how do you get yourself into the group? I think we need a break. What time is it? We need a break.
10:03.
10 to 2.
3.
Oh, sorry about that. Yeah, see, I get going. So, and, you know, and you gotta stop. All right? Okay,
Not
try to
yet
come
this
back.
one.
It's got so much stuff in it. That's all we're going to do is the one chapter. And again, for Matthew's community, this was how you held the community together. So it's Matthew 18. And just do Matthew 18, the whole thing. And we will deal with the fact that it's forgiveness, but it's also levels of forgiveness. There are levels of forgiveness, and reconciliation is mutual forgiveness. Then restorative justice is what we used to call penance, and communion or at-one-ment, what we used to call atonement. Right? So it's 4 levels. And then within those 4 levels, there are ways to do it very pragmatically in community. So that's what we're going to do on Wednesday. Wednesday, my friend Margaret is going to come at the break, so she'll be here around 2:30, hopefully we'll have a break at 2:30. And she's bringing my books with me, with her. And so, shit, I forgot to ask her about credit cards. Money, checks, whatever. She's going to bring a couple of copies of Mary, the Shadow of Grace. Mary, the Shadow of Grace was put out originally in 1997. And it dealt with all of the stories of Mary in the New Testament. It won the Vatican Book Award in 1997, to the shock of many people. They choose 5 books a year at the Vatican, and they publish it in an edition for the Vatican Library. And it's available in Italian in the original language. So they had called Orbis to say, you know, Vatican Book Award. They were panicking because they had just gotten off the phone with the Vatican going after Tissa Palisuria, this book on Mary, and for what, you know, and condemning it. So when they called and said, now we'd like to talk about this one, it was like, But it did get the Vatican Book Award, and they asked me in 2007 to write another chapter for the book on the theology of Mary according to the early fathers and mothers of the church, and now. So the last chapter, which is a rather long chapter, in Mary the Shadow of Grace, which came out in 2009, is Mary as the catechumen in Luke's Gospel. So you can look at, you know, now see what it looks like in Joseph. It has another whole chapter on Mary as the catechumen. But again, it has nothing to do with the birth of Jesus. What happens to Mary as a catechumen happens to everyone in Luke's. So she's going to bring a couple of those. The book, This Will Be Remembered of Her, which came out last year from Bergman's, just won the Catholic Press Association for the award in spirituality. So, just send me an email, I haven't seen it. It's women from all over the world and every religious tradition and what they're going to be remembered for. All the stuff is scripture oriented. They'll bring copies of The Hour of the Tiger Facing Our Fears. It's every fear you could possibly have with all the do not be afraid, fear not, little flock, all those kinds of things. They'll bring most of the beliefs. I told her to bring 1 or 2 copies of most of them, like Not Counting Women and Children, parables. And I told her to bring some copies of Mark, because we're in Matthew, but we're going into Mark. And the book is called On Mark. And I told her to bring Prophet's Words of Fire. That also won the Faculty Book Award for 2002. So,
I'll be broke after my
it's a good cause. So she'll come and we'll do that tomorrow. So that's what we're going to do. Then on Monday we will do parables. All right. On Monday we're going to have a few visitors to class. And I don't know how many are coming, but I know for sure someone's coming from Maryknoll, from Olivia. They happen to be up in Maryknoll at the moment, so they're coming. Some of the novices from where I'm staying at the Benedictine Monastery in New Jersey, Del Barton, they may come. So if you want to bring people, feel free. There'll be others as well. Okay, so you know sort of what we're going to do between now and whatever. Right? Okay, how are you feeling after? How are you feeling after Are you in any of the groups? See, that's the thing. Really, that is the hardest part of all. That, okay, if this is true, what does that mean? You know, and again, how do you get yourself through? Again, the last place is a good place to start. We talk about tours. Those who are open to conversion and the Word of God, rather than those who are resistant and antagonistic to the Word of God. And again, you got to do that.
You want to ask?
Yes.
Kev's got a question. Kev's got a question.
Again, you can't do anything as an individual. I mean, think of your own life. What kind of, you know, if you're a prophet, but I'm sure you don't want to fall into that category. That immediately puts you in group number 8. You know, so, another way to start is with a group of people struggling with the scriptures on a weekly basis to convert your life and then together convert your life.
So, like I think of for myself, like, as much as I'm poorer than almost every single homeless person on the street, literally, as a student, but I'm not poor in that sense of the word whatsoever when it comes down to that aspect of it. What was the thing where you would have family? I will always have family.
You'll
I will
always have
never know
education.
that. Right. So
You'll always have your white in the culture.
right. There's certain
We
things
have all
I have
kinds
to
of-
understand. I have to go beyond myself because there's things in there I could never, because that's not any aspect of who I am. And I'm sure there's lots of people in this room that would feel that.
This is the trouble with the
exact
gospel
same
when you do it for conversion. That we have individualized it because then nobody holds us accountable. Nobody pushes us. We can decide what it means and, that's it. It doesn't necessarily help. And we want community, but for us, community is tell me I'm doing good. God loves me. And that, we're doing the best we can. And I used to call it angelology, touched by an angel theology, God floats down and kisses everybody at the end and Well, anybody who watched that, that's kind of what it comes down to. But literally, this is the first teaching of Jesus. And that's why everything follows from it is what it begins to look like in reality. Now remember, they're being persecuted by the Jewish community, or at least the leadership. They have been exiled from all their families, business propositions, everything to become a Christian. You lost it all. They were being persecuted by the Romans viciously, and they started fighting among themselves. That's what we're going to deal with on Monday. No, that's it. Now, we're going to do the Syrophoenician woman because this is halfway through the Gospel of Matthew. And it shows you very clearly what's going up to this point and then how it changes drastically afterwards. And it's also a very disturbing story to many people. The Syro-Phoenician woman. Okay, now Syro-Phoenicians are also Canaanites. They were the original people in the Promised Land when they came over and destroyed them and enslaved them and took their land and whatever. And we forget that. So the Jews in the Promised Land, the land belonged to the Canaanites or the Syro-Phoenicians. So Jesus is he's out of his own world. He has stepped over the line and he is now in another country with other people. So, and that's important to remember. And that's all you need to know. And we'll talk about this. Close your eyes for a minute. Ask the Spirit. Open your ears and open your heart and mind so that you can hear the good news that is coming towards us as well. All right, open your ears and open your heart, open your mind and open your eyes. The Lord be with you.
And also with you.
A reading from the Holy Gospel according to Matthew.
Glory to you, O Lord.
Now Jesus left that place and he retreated to the area around Tyre and Sidon. And behold, a Syro-Phoenician woman of that area kept following along behind them and crying out, "Son of David, Lord, have mercy on me. Son of David, Lord, have mercy on me. My daughter is tormented by a demon." And Jesus said nothing. He did not respond to her. Then his disciples said to him, "Get rid of her. Make her go away. She is crying out after us." And Jesus said to them, "I have come only for the lost sheep of the house of Israel." But the woman wouldn't stop. "Lord, Son of David, have mercy on me." And then she went and did him homage, saying, "Please help me." And Jesus said to her, "It isn't right to take the food that belongs to the children and throw it to the dogs." And she came back with, "Even the dogs eat the scraps that are thrown from the master's table." And Jesus was shocked and said, "Woman, you have great faith. Let it be done to you as you wish." And in that moment, her daughter was healed. Now Jesus left that place and began to walk along the Sea of Galilee. He climbed up to a mountain and sat down. And crowds came to him from everywhere. And they brought people who were sick with them. Those who were deformed, who were mute, who were blind and lame. And they laid them all at his feet. And he healed them all. And then everyone was amazed to see the deformed made whole, and the blind able to see, and the mute speaking, and those who could not move dancing. And they began to glorify the God of Israel. This is the gospel.
Praise to Lord Jesus Christ.
Now, two questions. What in the story, what does it make you feel? What disturbs you? What kind of, the first part, what does it make you feel? What sticks out? What is it saying to you? What don't you understand? That sort of thing. And then the second thing, and do that first before you get to the one that what deeply disturbs you and bothers you. So make sure you deal with the other half before you get to the deeply disturbing and bothering. Who? Who's talking to? Even when you're confused. And again, if you had read the story, we skipped it. We'll do it if we have time. He heals a Roman centurion's servant, and says, "Behold, I have not seen faith like this from anyone in Israel." Well, Israel would be, everybody's brother would be bouncing off the walls by that time. That's only like 2 chapters after the Beatitudes. So now we're another 2-3 chapters. So he's left because it's like, I don't know what to do. They're not listening to me, they're rejecting me. Everyone is just out of hand saying no. So he's hiding out. You know, where would you go when you want to hide out? And so the disciples are getting upset because they know he's getting rejected and they're following him. So if they're going to reject him, they're going to reject them too. So they're nervous, and the last thing they want to do is be noticed in another country. So it's like, no, keep quiet, don't say anything, get out of here, do it quick. Anything else that you react to? Just guts.
But how can a woman be any particular thing? She has, as a woman, she has no power. She's there, she's crying out, maybe she's...
In her country, you certainly can gather a crowd. And if you're trying to escape from people, that's the last thing you want. And again, anybody harassing you, they may not have power, but, you know, getting harassed in public is no easy thing. No matter who you are, it doesn't matter who does it. See, we keep saying women don't have power. Women have got plenty of power. You know, and it's just, you know, they may not have power in particular structures, but, you know, in most places, you don't mess with women.
But in the end, all she wants is to ask him to help her water.
Oh no, she wants a little bit more than ask help. She's definitely way beyond asking.
Was her request, I mean the woman's request, be a kind of harassment to Jesus?
Well, it depends, you know. She's crying out and wants him to, you know, he's been doing it, and even in his own village he can't do anything. Because they don't even believe in him, so he couldn't do any things there. You know? So, but it's definitely, she wants, I mean, he wants to get away from people and she wants attention. And the disciples are utterly lacking in compassion. They want to just go over, make her go away. Listen again and listen to the verbs. All right, and because you've got your own idea of what the verbs are like. Close your eyes and ask the Spirit to open your ears and open your mind and heart that you might listen and hear the good news. All right, open your ears and open your heart, open your mind and open your eyes. The Lord be with you.
Also with you.
A reading from the Holy Gospel according to Matthew.
Glory to you, Lord.
Now Jesus left that place and retreated to the area around Tyre and Sidon. And behold, a woman from that area began to trail along behind him, crying out, saying, Lord, Son of David, have pity on me. Lord, Son of David, have pity on me. My daughter is severely tormented by a demon. And Jesus said nothing to her. And the disciples came and said, make her go away. Get rid of her. She's crying out after us. And in response, Jesus said to them, I have come only for the lost sheep of the house of Israel. But she kept at it, and then she went and did him homage, saying, please help me. And Jesus said to her, it's not right to take the food that belongs to the children and throw it to the dogs. And she came back with, even the dogs eat the scraps that the masters throw from their table. And Jesus is shocked and says, woman, your faith is incredible. Let it be done to you as you say. And from that moment, her daughter was healed. This is the gospel of the Lord.
Praise the Lord Jesus Christ.
What did you notice about any verb? Right. She is intent. She is hounding him. She's screaming at the top of her lungs. And even when he doesn't say anything, even when he just talks to his disciples like she's not there, she goes farther. She did him homage. What do you think that means? She got down on her hands and knees and crawled to him and wrapped her arms around his ankles and kissed his feet and groveled and begged, please, Lord, help. This is even worse than just crying out, while he's trailing behind. She is not about to give up. Any other verb that struck you?
Shocked.
Right, Jesus is shocked. Yeah, has Jesus been shocked before?
Oh,
Well, again, the translation, when you do word for word translation, you do not get it. I put the two stories together because Jesus is shocked with the Roman centurion. When he says, I too am a man who knows what obedience is, and I live under authority, and I say come, and he comes, and I say go, and he goes. Jesus says, he's shocked with obedience. The Gentiles consistently shock him with belief, whereas his own people reject him outright. So he is totally taken aback that somebody who isn't a Jew, just like the Roman centurion, is believing in him when his own aren't. What other phrase or word just went, Follow. Okay, she's following him. It doesn't say that his disciples are him. And the idea is if it doesn't specifically say the disciples are, it means they're not. All right? So she's following him. They are not. They're with him, but they're not following. Catch anything else?
I have come to the lost sheep of Israel.
Right. This is who Jesus thinks he is for the first 15 chapters of Matthew. I have been sent. I have come only for the lost sheep of the house of Israel. That's what he's been doing. And yet, what are the lost sheep of the house of Israel doing? Nothing. And she's not the lost sheep of the house of Israel either. She's the one that they drove out when they came in.
When he said, let it be done to you. Because then it says it's not about I. It's not that he is saving the daughter. It's she is, or a power greater than both of them.
Oh yeah, it's her. Let it be done to you as you. It's the exact words he uses with the Roman centurion. Let it be done to you as you say. It's also what Luke will use to describe Mary, the Catholic who becomes a believer. Let it be done to me as you say. They're all very specific lines carried over. This woman is a believer in him, whereas his own people are not. What's she crying out? Lord, Son of David, have mercy on me. No, they won't even buy that much, let alone anything else he's talking about. So she's even addressing him as a believer in his own country, whereas they won't accept that he is Lord or that he is the Son of David.
Is that what the whole aspect of the story about the straps and the dog and the children, like saying like these children are supposed to be kind of like the lost sheep of Israel?
He's taking the food.
And so Jesus is saying that is how it's supposed to, how he thinks it's supposed to be. But she is kind of saying that no, the dogs will be the ones that will listen, in parallel to.
We're moving a little faster past that. He's saying the food that I have brought with me is for the lost sheep of the house of Israel. And it's not right that I should throw it to the dogs. Right? She's an outsider. She's a Gentile. That's exactly the way they treated. The Jews treated everybody who wasn't a Jew. You know? It's an insult anywhere in the Middle East today. People in the Middle East do not understand what we do with dogs. Dogs to them are dirty, unclean. Anybody else? I mean, so this is a standard, slack, right? But she breaks every to And she comes back with, but even the dogs will take the scraps that the master throws from the table. And she's saying, I don't care whether they get it or not, I'll take anything. I'll take the scraps. I'll take them from you. You used to call me a dog, I'll take them from you. Which is a rather startling thing. Now, what else? Now, what do you think is being said in this story? This is literally the middle point of Matthew's Gospel. Everything changes from here on out. Listen to the rest of it. And Jesus went from there along the Sea of Galilee and climbed the mountain. He's on the other side. All right, so he's still in foreign territory. And they began to bring to him all who were sick, all kinds of people. Those who were deformed, those who were mute, those who were blind and lame, and all other sorts of things. They laid them at his feet. And he healed them all. And they were stunned to see that the mute could speak, and the deformed were made whole, and the lame could leap and dance, and those who were blind could see. And they began to praise the God of Israel loudly. What happened with Jesus?
They brought all the Gentiles to him.
From this point on, Jesus he moves out of Israel into the Gentile world. He retreats because he's trying to figure out who he is and what's going on, and he tells him who he is.
There's like a dialogue, you know.
Of course.
There's a dialogue between the human and God.
Oh no, don't forget the human and God. Jesus hadn't a clue who he was. He knew he was a human being. He thought in terms of being one of the prophets. You know, he knew he wasn't the Messiah. He was saying that over and over again and telling them, stop. But he thought he was there to preach as a prophet to Israel, and Israel, like it does with most prophets, said, get out of here. We don't care. And so he is struggling with who he is. And she tells him, you belong to the world. You belong to the Gentiles. So Jesus gets what he needs, and she gets what she needs. Jesus grows into an understanding of who he is by listening to somebody poorer than he is.
So he's moving into the understanding of the Messiah.
No, he never says he's the Messiah. And we'll deal with that later on. He sees himself as a prophet. Again, the Messiah was for the Jewish people. He is now seeing himself and his teaching and message for the entire world. And again, this is the reason for Matthew's community even existing. It's made up of all these people. And so someone who is poorer than Jesus, rejected as a prophet, etc., teaches him. And we know that because all the exegesis is, she cries out that her daughter is being tormented by a demon. They're pretty sure that that is a way of saying that she's dying slowly of starvation. Because in that area where the Syrophoenicians lived, in outside of Palestine and in the Tyre and Sidon area, was incredible poverty. And that people were dying on a regular basis, massive numbers, especially children, and the elderly were dying of slow starvation. Now, when you are slowly starving to death, you hallucinate, you sleep, you react totally unexpectedly to all sorts of things. You sleep, you don't, for long hours. And that she is poor, so poor she's hungry all the time. And the woman is mourning her own child's position that there is no future. Literally, again, this is what it means by the mother lode of all the stories and everything. This woman is poor. This woman is an outcast. She's not even a Jew. Her daughter is starving to death. She is, she has nothing. She calls her work and gives. And the way they go back and forth is I grew up in New York. I grew up in Brooklyn. There is a way of people in Brooklyn. I don't know whether it's other places. Not the Bronx so much. That when you talk to people, you can really slice and dice. You know, it's for lack of a better way to say it. I mean, when I do it, everybody knows. A lot of my friends say, I'm so glad you're my friend, you won't kill me. I'm an 8 on the Enneagram besides. And so if you're a really good 8 on the Enneagram, and you're just charging rhinoceros when you're underneath, and you're stalking a tiger when you are, so you don't know the blood on the floor is yours until you get it. But people in Brooklyn do it all the time. Well, they also do it in the Middle East. It's an insult, but I got more. It's a rapport that she is about as familiar with him as anybody could be. She's talking to him as a mother would to a child, husband and wife, best friends, all sorts of stuff. She's just what my place to him. And if you're going to diss me, I'll dish you back. I'll take whatever you want. But at the same time, she calls him master. She calls him son of David. She calls him Lord. And so she is honoring him. She's telling him the truth. And she's giving him knowledge that he can't get from the Jews or even his own disciples. So she reveals to him who he is. Now that's a staggering statement. Because it says that Jesus grew in wisdom and age and grace. Well, he kept growing in wisdom, and that kind of stuff. And you learn primarily from the least likely people you would ever think would be able to tell you anything. People, you and your friends would just like that go away, leave me alone. So he receives what he needs. In exchange, he says, "Oh woman." Highest compliment in the Jewish community is to call a woman woman. It's like the essence of wisdom, it's the essence of mercy, it's all sorts of things. And he calls her that and says, "Be it done to you as you say." And she's more a follower at that point than any of his followers. Because they're going to go back into Galilee and whatever, and they're going to train the right lots of ways that we don't imagine. But that's why he does the same thing on the Gentile side that he does on the Jewish side. He goes up the mountain, teaches them, and they bring him and lay all of their sicknesses and lacks and whatever at the feet. They're all the poor, the blind, the deformed, the lame, the mute, this kind of stuff. He heals them all, and they begin to praise the God of Israel. And this is the midpoint of Matthew's Gospel, and the last will be go out into the whole world and make disciples, teaching them everything I've taught you. So this is the turning out into all the world. And that's why he keeps saying Jesus in no gospel ever will say he's the Messiah. The Messiah is a nationalist leader, specifically for the Jews, to drive the Romans out, put them back on the map with a king, get their temple back, and a force to be reckoned with. And Jesus, the remnant, is those who read the scriptures in such a way that he would be the presence of justice and abiding peace, so that all the nations would come to him, streaming to Jerusalem to learn wisdom. And it has nothing to do with nationalism, nothing to do with driving the Romans out, nothing to do with putting them on the map and reclaiming the temple. It's an inner turning for justice and peace. So she's the model or the image of the poor, those who mourn, the meek. She's hungering and thirsting for righteousness, a way to live. This is the way it is understood by any exegete these days. Now, this is true. This has staggering ramifications for theology in a lot of ways. Right? If Jesus learned from other people, this is where wisdom is now. This is what he's preaching. This is where you find wisdom, and they have revelation from God that you can't see. They can see more clearly. Now, if this is true, what does this mean for us? Why don't you take a few minutes, turn to your neighbor. Because in this case, you're in the position of Jesus, or worse, the disciples. Right? And they are utterly lacking in compassion, and that's the same all the way through. But they just wanted to go away, and even when Jesus starts to do things, from now on they get bad shape on everything he does. But what does it mean that Jesus learns? He learns from the least unlikely people, and that his disciples have to learn how to do that too. Again, Matthew's community, the Jewish disciples, are having major troubles with the numbers of Gentiles coming into the community, which is the community of Matthew. And they're having major troubles remembering all that Jesus has taught. This is where you go to learn. This is the Beatitudes. These are folk. They have to be your brothers and sisters baptized into the body of Christ as well. You got to throw that in there. Yes.
I can see how the Syrophoenician woman fits into the Beatitudes. You know, woman, poverty. So the centurion, does he?
Anybody who wasn't a Jew is considered outside, unclean, the whole shield. Again, they don't have to obey the law to the Romans.
Right.
They don't.
But he's coming from a whole different place in society. He bears the power.
But he also humbles himself in public and obeys Jesus. And he's asking, and again, I did this because he's asking on behalf of one of his servants. She's asking on behalf of her daughter. Big difference. I mean, you do a lot for your daughter, that you wouldn't do for your servant. Plus, he's doing it in front. He's occupying the territory, Roman centurion. So he is. I mean, they would have been absolutely shocked that anybody would have done this. And you get the likely experience that again he will follow. Again, this is for the community that was all over. Right? And Matthew's community is the Jerusalem community, right? And it will become the Roman. Who's the last person in Matthew's gospel? The Roman centurion who says, "True, this one was." So he's bringing in the people that are the community ones. Okay, take a minute, talk to each other. What kind of rabbi?
In society or something like that. And you really should be humble, because in being humble, you really learn from other people. And I see this as a teacher, I learn from my students. So in that sense, I saw the humanity of Jesus and how he had to humble himself to learn from this woman who was an outsider. I was consoled by it.
We have images of Jesus that really aren't human. Or he's human on some times and then not so human on other times. And again, we have concoctions that we put together rather than he was just like us, struggling with everything. He's struggling with rejection. That his family will have nothing to do with him, his neighbors will have nothing to do with him, his own people are rejecting him out of kind. And the second half of the gospel is going to deal with what happens when his followers reject him. And specifically, the disciples. And that his own, who think they're the closest to him, are the ones that cause him the most distress. Right? And then the people you don't think are the leaders or whatever, they're the ones who are the believers. But we don't think of Jesus in those kinds of terms. In Matthew, Mark, and Luke's gospel, Jesus is human. In John's gospel, he's not. John's gospel, he's another world altogether. And again, there's only one story in John's gospel that is in all the others. That's the driving the money changers out of the temple. And so it's a very different image of Jesus because they developed differently. But we basically don't deal much with the fact that Jesus is human. We really think he knew everything. And he was setting people up and he knew what he was going to do and all this kind of stuff. Well then, what's the fact? If he's not human like us and struggling and whatever, then, and the understanding is he doesn't do anything he doesn't ask us to do. What else does it mean if this is true in any way, shape, or form?
I think, and I was talking a little bit about this in our group here. I think that the struggle. I'm sorry. The struggle that I'm having is that after this experience, he's shocked by it, and he goes up to the mountain, which is where he goes to pray. To me, it seems like he's going off to process this information, this new kind of.
Is that in Matthew's gospel? He doesn't go up the mountain to pray. What does
he go to the desert?
He goes up to teach.
Oh, okay.
Remember Moses on the mountain, right, and all that kind of stuff. See, he does run away and hide to pray, but this isn't it. He immediately just goes and does the same thing for the Gentiles that he did in chapter 5 when he went up to the mountain, sat down, and started to teach the disciples about the Beatitudes.
So he gets the lesson and it's there.
He learns it.
That's good. That's impressive.
Because,
Kevin is impressed with Jesus. Good. I'm sure Jesus is happy to know that.
It's important. They begin to praise
They
God.
follow.
Whereas none of the others, if you read in the beginning, if you read through, none of them rejoice over any of the healings. Whether the guy's lowered through the roof in front of Jesus, nobody's rejoicing about that except his friends lowered through the roof. But not the crowd, not the scribes and the Pharisees or anything. Nobody rejoices in any of the healings even. But immediately the outsiders, anybody who's an outsider would have been in one of these groups. They're unclean, they're not believers, but they are. Anything else?
I also realized that the woman's faith in the expression of the faith in Jesus was like preparation of a fertile ground for Jesus able to, preach, and get his message across because from his own country, they didn't understand him or they rejected him. Now a woman, has, experienced her faith in him. So he went to the mountain, a fertile ground had been prepared for him.
She sets him up and says, go for it. He goes, okay. Now her faith is born of desperation. Most people's faith, the deeper it goes, the more desperate it is. So her faith is born of desperation. Whereas the Jews, they may live in desperate conditions, but they didn't take a risk and they didn't take a leap and say you're it. Because they had more expectations of what it should be, who he should be, and how he should be. Whereas if you're just desperate, they'll take it. But she certainly is pushy. You wouldn't want to mess with her. Now, what if we were all like that and went after the leadership of the church? I'm serious. That's what she does, and he changes. And the understanding is that means that constant conversion was a reality for Jesus, safe home. Constant reality, and so therefore it should be for everyone in the church, especially the more power you have. You have to be able to listen to people who you don't have any time for, you could care less about, whatever, but they can call you to change on a regular basis, and massive radical change right now, right here.
Yes, but they have people who are saying, don't listen, don't.
Well, again, that's the apostle. The disciples are doing that, but you got to find out whether you act more like a disciple. Most of the people who work for church don't bite the hand that feeds them. So they nibble on it a little bit, but no biting the hand. And so, they're more like the disciples, make her shut up and make her go away. We want to talk to you. They want him alone with them, and they decide who rates talking to Jesus and who doesn't. Now, they control that a lot when they're in the Jewish side of the lake, but they can't control it when they're on the other side. Again, this is the same thing that's happening in Methodist Church. They have no control over who is ending up the leaders and what they're deciding to do and whatever, whereas they're saying, oh no, this is what we have to do. This is who's got the authority. This is the way we do it. Things haven't changed that much. But again, it's to us. Who do we act like when push comes to shove? And most of us are not in the position of the poor, the mourning, and the meek. We're not even in the position of hunger and thirst for justice. And so, more often than not, when push comes to shove, we act like we're disciples. They are not happy campers if you read this through again. From here on out, they are backing off from Jesus as fast as you can. They're ignoring him outright whenever he says that. And sometimes they're confused, and sometimes they just don't. They're afraid, and sometimes they just say no. But from here on out, Jesus got nobody except oddballs, so to speak. People you wouldn't expect. What if all the people we've canonized in the last 400 years aren't saints at all? And some of the people the churches had major troubles with are. In fact, Dave used to say to church, dare let them canonize me and make my life mean nothing.
What?
Well, it's true. I mean, to be canonized says you're in, you're it, this is what we want you to do. It's a method of control. Why don't they canonize? You know, and I'm sure Oscar Romero feels the same way. Julio Grande, all the people killed in El Salvador, you know, it's like, don't you dare. This is too political. It's too chancy. Because they'd have to say that all the other things that they said were true. So it's much easier to go canonize the Pope. You know?
Oh, sorry, how do they canonize the Catholic Church? How do they just...
Oh, it's big money and a lot of work and all sorts of things. It's big political groups and all sorts of things.
That makes them saints.
Yeah. According to them. I suspect many of them who are saints have rude awakenings on meeting Sunday. We'll get into that if we get towards the end of the class. What else does this mean, this kind of an interpretation?
Like as somebody said before, these stories, these gospel stories you've directed our attention to, seeing Jesus' attention is widening, becoming more inclusive, and it seems like at this moment in the life of the church, it's becoming more and more exclusive. Who's in, who's out, for everything from sexual orientation to whether you bow before receiving communion. It just seems so small-minded and small-hearted compared to...
And that's what we are.
Yeah.
And in a sense, to say that we're small-minded and whatever, we really are resistant to the gospel, not open to the gospel, which is the exact opposite of being open. We think we know it all, wherein the rest of you may not be. We're very quick to judge who's out, you know, or who's on the fringe and sliding or whatever. Yeah, and it certainly shows up very clearly in the state of the church today.
It's about identity too. Identity.
Yeah, and again, Matthew wrote this as an identity for a group of people that was standing in opposition to all the powers and authority of the world, whether it was economic, whether it was nationalistic, whether it was militaristic, whether it was sociological pressure. His community was an alternative reality of hope, because that only exists when the majority is out, a handful is in.
You know, saying all this though, can you really maybe possibly blame those Catholic Americans for not wanting to donate to this church of such corruption now? Because I see it at both sides.
That's just an excuse. If they were in
Not
communities,
necessarily.
if they were in communities that studied the scripture for conversion on a weekly basis, they'd have plenty of groups to offer money to and support to. Basically, and I may not be giving money to the church, but they're not doing anything else either.
And I can
And they're not
appreciate
reading
that
scriptures.
aspect of it, but I think that does add another dilemma. Because don't get me wrong, I'm not Catholic, and because of this, but I would never be a part of something that is like this. And I make that choice.
Before the
But it's
pedophilia
like-
problems and all that kind of stuff, the church, you know, basically every Christian church is operating out of the same stuff.
But even before that, why would anyone want, like, there are a lot of people that wouldn't want to be a part of that, and because giving is something that, at least in this culture, is something that people, like when you're talking about helping on an individual level, you don't necessarily see as much good as can happen, and so we see it here so much in this country as being something that you do in like your church, in your charity type of setting, but we really only have like these church type of movements here for it, but no one wants to be a part of it.
Basically, the United States religious people, whether they're Catholics or Christians or anything else, they have access to everything. They have access to all of the good interpretations of Scripture. They have access to every educational group, etc. in the world, communication system they could give. The reality is they don't and won't. The reality is, as long as I choose individually to do what I want to do, which is incredibly American, I do it. That doesn't make you religious in any way, shape, or form. It makes you a decent human being. When you teach this, and this is what church was, and it is what it should be one day, and it is in many parts of the world among the poor, of which there are many more poor than there are middle class or rich. So the reality is there. But to let American Catholics who are so wealthy and middle class off is just to let them off. Because they know, I mean, when Oscar Romero stood at Mass and his last homily and begged the United States government not to send arms to kill his own people, and then he was shot dead at the altar. Americans know exactly what's going on, but they're more American than they are Christians or believers in Jesus. And again, they interpret the Scriptures to stroke themselves, rather than in a community that would hold them accountable to say, you know very well what that means, what are you going to do? Right? Religion converts you, transforms you, transfigures your life with others. And most people as Americans don't want that. They want a God that protects them and is like them and, comforts them and, God's on my side, not yours. And that's sort of how they operate. And unfortunately, the leadership in the church more often serves that than not. And not just the Catholic leadership. The Italians do it, the Lutherans, the Methodists, everybody else does it, especially the evangelicals. So the problem is with human beings. And then anybody who has power, it's more of a problem with anybody who has power. And religious power is insidious because it has such a massive effect. So can't let people off the hook. Got to at least be truthful and say, just plain old selfish.
What kind of relations do the base communities that you've alluded to have with the institutional church in countries? Do they?
It depends, and it's loose and it's different. They study the Scripture in small groups. They do all what we would call corporal works of mercy, which are justice. Each group sometimes is known for a particular one. So if you have trouble with people in jail or prisons, you go to this group. This group, knows how to work the systems and things like that. So it's like church inside church inside church. They never do liturgy in the small base community. They study the Scriptures. They will pray, but it's not formal kinds of things. It's more how you do this together. They go to Mass, again, on Sundays if they have it, if not every third Sunday, fourth Sunday, fifth Sunday, whenever the priest comes. So they're there. But when things need to be done in a large base, they can hit the communities within 24 hours. You can get 20,000 base communities to do something. So it's literally church within church. And there are hundreds of thousands of base communities, say in Brazil. And a lot of other places too. So they're there, the church structure is still in place, but they are operating in, under, around, and over and forward. But they don't usurp church authority. In Central and South America, there are always individuals. Even in South Africa, there are individuals that are with the base community, even though they may be part of the hierarchy, but everybody knows exactly who they are, and whose side they're on, and that sort of thing. And they clash on occasion, usually over something very political and violent. That one church says, no, we can't do this, and the other says, I mean, practically everything that has gone on in Latin America and South America in the last 30 years was either conversion for change that was good from the base communities, or afterwards it was found out that the hierarchy backed the regime and backed the people who were torturing people to death and that kind of stuff. And it's especially strong down there because usually number one son inherited everything, number two son went into the church and rose through the ranks and stuff. Lopez Trujillo, who was the head of all kinds of things in Latin America, he was number two son. So he was part of the group that killed everybody else. They're dealing with the fact that there's a clear distinction about who's on whose side and who's doing what. But the base communities is the reality of the church now and will be for the future. There's no going back. It's a question of in the United States that considers itself the church, and it's basically fighting Rome for who's in control. Base communities are almost non-existent.
Are there places where it's transformed the institutional church, or they lead kind of parallel?
A lot of the bishops who follow end up dead. They end up going off the side of the cliff in a car one day, and this kind of thing, or whatever. Or as soon as they die, they are replaced by people like Oakstay, all kinds of things that the structure itself is trying to eliminate. But the base communities themselves are the church. But they have a tendency to be the poor, the indigenous, the workers, and so the ones who are the landowners still, there's a rich church and a poor church. And unfortunately, most of the wealthy are in with the Vatican.
Within the United States, are the priests that are kind of against, or maybe not against isn't the right word, but kind of going against the grain of this idea of the Vatican and even some of the higher ups in the U.S. Are they the ones that are moving around to different parishes so they can't coincide at all, or do they just not get parishes?
It's not a reality in the United States. In the United States, you are appointed. There's no other thing. The bishop is appointed by the Vatican, and then the bishop appoints priests, dioceses, etc. in parishes. There are individuals who are fighting this issue or that issue, usually in-house church issue. Very rarely is it someone who's working, say, with farm workers, or working with, against the death penalty, or working in prisons, or working in immigration, that sort of thing. They just don't. It's too tightly controlled and too much to lose.
And if any of these priests that may have some of that aspiration sparked in them, is it stifled as quick as it's?
Most of them don't. Again, when you've been in an organization for years, you're afraid of losing what you got. So very, very few say anything. They may have sparks. Most of the guys who were really, really good were products of the Vatican Council, and they're all getting old and dying. And so the bishops that are being appointed and the priests going into the seminary are, generally speaking, they'd like to live in 1850.
Some of them. Some of them.
Yeah, some of them. But
Not everybody.
Not all of them. But some of them definitely, you're dealing with huge groups. Every bishop in the United States, except 11 out of 390-something, were appointed by John Paul II or Ratzinger. The kinds of people they appoint have no pastoral experience whatsoever. They came out of canon law, they came out of seminary, they came out of administration. When you have those kinds of people, they're not even thinking of hands-ons in any way, shape, or form. It's very, very hard, even for people in the church, and even more so for people who don't see it from the outside, but who do see it from the outside, to realize that constant conversion is what we dedicate ourselves to in baptism. And that is not a reality across the board in most places. Individuals, maybe, what am I going to do for Lent? What am I going to do for the New Year? But it's not kind of a big thing. But this is constant, especially constant conversion to the word following of Jesus. Which means the first step is, I'm in trouble. We're in trouble. What are we going to do? And that's really hard. And most of the folks in the church never ask that. Unless they run into somebody like Jesus ran into the Syrophoenician woman. Sometimes they get it on a trip they take to, twinning parishes in other countries and that kind of stuff. Or just somebody you meet on the street or something out of the ordinary happens. But most people don't change until something shocks them. They're just creatures of habit. I'm going to tell you a story. And it's more about the attitude. I took it from the salt, which we didn't talk about. You are the salt of the earth, which was the line after it. And if salt loses its flavor, what good is it? It's worthless. It's useless. It's only should be thrown out and trampled on, right? Which is, doesn't leave you a lot of options. And so I took this is an old story from Hinduism about gurus, and I took it because The Beatitudes are literally a mindset and a heart set. It's kind of like how do you shift base so that you begin to think differently and absorb things differently. And so this is the story. All stories are true. Some of them actually happen. This one's going to happen to you. Once upon a time, there was a guru, and he had lots of disciples. And some of them were enthusiastic and, tried everything he said. Others, I got to go home and think about it, talk about it, whatever. And then there would come some that just moaned and groaned and complained. They could find something wrong with absolutely everything. And there was one of them that was sort of the ringleader that just drove the teacher out of his mind. Finally, he had enough. And he called the man in and he said, listen, I've got to teach you something. It's just between the two of us. He said, I want you to go and get a big thing of salt. He said, make sure it's about this thick. Good table salt. So off he went and got salt. He said, now, he picked out a glass, about that size. He said, fill it with water. So he filled the glass with water. He said, pour the salt in. So he poured the salt in. He said, drink it. And the man's eyes kind of got big, and he swallowed it and got the whole thing down, a little layer of salt on the bottom. He said, what was it like? He said, bitter, absolutely bitter. He said, He said, I can barely talk, let alone it. He said, it's just horrible. He said, okay, got another thing of salt? Come. So they marched off, and they went down to the lake. And he says, pour the salt in the lake. So he poured the salt in the lake. He said, now drink. And the man bent over and drank and get rid of the other stuff. He said, what was it like? He said, fresh and cold and clear. He said, that's right. He said, what you have to learn is the amount of salt in your life, like the amount of pain in your life, is always the same. The difference is the container. Stop acting and living like a glass and start being a lake. And I think Jesus would go one step further and say, start being fresh water, ocean. This is the way of Jesus. Stop being glass. Start being lake. Salt like the pain in life. It's always the same. It's just what you do. Times that we Okay. Wednesday, bring your money. If you want to buy books, I'll sign them. If you're a date for kids.